This past August, a late summer ritual was reborn. Aspiring Arlington High football players took to the Pierce turf for preseason workouts. But at least one element was different than in years past. On one occasion, the team was led through drills not by AHS coaches, but by U.S. Marines. Which begs the question, do we as a community think that's a good idea? Joining me today to discuss that question, and others having to do with the military recruitment of school children, are two guests. Seth Kershner is a writer and researcher whose work has appeared in Rethinking Schools, In These Times, and Sojourners. He also co-authored the book Counter-Recruitment and the Campaign to Demilitarize Public Schools. Ray Ajemian served in the Army from 1965 to 1967 during the Vietnam War as an artillery instructor at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He became involved in the organization Veterans for Peace after the invasion of Iraq and has since done counter-recruitment work around his community. Welcome both to Wide Angle.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. So for the benefit of viewers who aren't familiar with the story, let me just give the backstory, gentlemen. So back in late August, it's the August 25th edition of the local newspaper, the Arlington Advocate, had a story, the title of which is Marines Train AHS Football Players, along with 5 good-sized photos, and that certainly caught my attention. It has certainly the students in a number of drills. It pictures what turn out to be U.S. Marines in fatigues, and some of the text reads, in addition to traditional push-ups and other exercises, the 3 Marines put players through a variety of tasks. Some of those included having players carry a teammate on a stretcher around the field, lifting weighted ammunition cans over their heads, and dodging an instructor armed with a pad as they ran with a weighted ball. The story continues, but that was enough to, as a parent, concern me and conceivably my son were he at this practice. So I did a little digging, and I called the editor of the Arlington Advocate and asked him if he had gotten any feedback on the story. He said that he had gotten a little bit via social media, and he perceived the people who responded probably as football boosters, and he thought that, and the feedback was that they thought it was great, that maybe this would help jumpstart the team at the beginning of the season. I got in touch with the football coach at the high school, and he said that he had told parents, as well as the students, about the practice ahead of time, and that the feedback that he got from parents was only positive to date. So, given that feedback, I'm wondering if both of you think that, you know, maybe I was making something out of nothing. Is there something to be concerned about having military recruiters visiting our kids, perhaps at a football practice?
Well, I think there certainly is something to be concerned about, and that newspaper article just offers a snapshot. A reader might see it and think, okay, this is a one-time thing, information on opportunities in the military. What could be wrong with that? In fact, the problem is thus. We have recruiters for the military getting unrestricted access to schools. Information that I've gotten through the Freedom of Information Act shows that in some Massachusetts high schools, recruiters for the Army visit more than 100 times in a given school year. That's, you know, more than 2 or 3 times per week. So students are inundated with information about the military. You know, in contrast, in other parts of the world, it's very rare to have such extreme levels of military contact with young people. You know, we're talking about Arlington, relatively affluent, largely white community. Recruiters probably are not visiting those schools that often. I think, Peter, you mentioned you did some digging and you found out that it's like twice a semester.
In fact, twice a year. Once in the fall, once in the spring with a college visit. And I'll say as background that for viewers just to have a sense of where this came from, back in 2001, if I'm correct, Seth, the No Child Left Behind Act required that high schools that receive federal funding also give military recruiters as many opportunities to visit with students as college recruiters get. Yes? More recently, just this past year, No Child Left Behind was replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act, but it continues the requirement of allowing military recruiters a similar number of visits as college recruiters get. And again, as I gather, in Arlington, it's 2 visits a year is the tradition, but I gather there's not a policy. Yeah. Ray, let me ask you a specific question. You're speaking to your military service. You were in the Army for 2 years during the Vietnam War, and even though you wouldn't steer young people away from the military, you do feel that crossing the line into schools is a line that should not be crossed. Why do you feel that should be a sacred division?
Not quite. I think if they are allowed to go in schools, if recruiters are allowed to go into schools themselves during the school day, a couple of things should happen. One, first of all, as we said before, there should be specific policy as to where the recruiters can be. If they have a table in the hall, maybe that's okay. If they're wandering around the lunchroom, I don't think that's good at all. But if they are allowed in, I also think that if you make the assumption, which I think I'm correct, that they are salesmen, that the other point of view should be given, and that is that other people should be allowed in, whatever you want to call it, counter-recruiting or whatever, to give the opposing point of view. And in my experience, in most schools, are very reluctant to allow people which they may consider to be radical or whatever to come into a school to give an opinion, because the military it's difficult to criticize the military in this country, and they assume that it's okay. Based on my experience, students do need the other point of view. People coming back from Iraq and so forth, things are not what is. I mean, if you look at the brochures that what the military use, they talk about getting money for school. They talk about different career. I mean, for instance, during the Iraq War, I remember, I'll say this very quickly. They advertised that you're in a sense getting training. Statistically, it points out that the military career is not an advancement to other careers. You just don't learn things that private industry wants. So you do need the other point of view. That's my point.
Right. And maybe we use that as a springboard to talking to Seth about sort of the disingenuous, perhaps, that both of you seem to be speaking of. You know, certainly for some time, our country has had a penchant for ending up in conflicts or wars around the globe. Seth, what does your research show, however, in terms of how forthcoming military recruiters are with young people about the very real likelihood of their being involved in life-threatening circumstances as members of the military?
The little research that has been done about how military recruiters operate in schools is very interesting in this regard. There was a survey of over 1,000 high school students in South Texas, I think from 2009, 2010. And about half of those students said yes, they'd had contact with a military recruiter in their school. Out of that portion, 86% said that they had never been informed that military service was a risky endeavor. Wow. Pretty remarkable. And just through my own reading of the military recruiter trade journals, like the Army's Recruiter Journal and Navy Recruiter Magazine, sometimes recruiters are quite candid in a forum like that, and they'll talk about things that they've told students. And one example that I sort of put down here is that there was an Army recruiter talking to a group of students at the time when the Iraq War was really at its peak, and students asked him, well, you know, we're concerned about getting killed. What can you say to that? And his response was, well, there's danger all around us, even in civilian life. Yeah.
It would be logical to think that recruiters begin their efforts at recruiting in later high school, as young people can't enlist in the military until they're 17 years old. Turns out, however, that that's not the fact. How young are recruiters aiming their efforts at nowadays, and how are they going about doing that?
Well, it's a little known fact, but you can find in recruiter training manuals, you can find a lot of references to this sort of thing that you're describing. They are instructed, recruiters are instructed to reach students in high schools from 9th grade up. So high schools obviously are the main center of attention for military recruiters, but they're looking at 14-year-olds, they're looking at 15-year-olds. Then the Air Force has this initiative called Recruiter After Next, and it's rather an interesting coinage. The term refers to this idea that recruiters are working today on 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, not because those kids can enlist next year. Of course, that's not possible. Ray said they have to wait till they're 17 with parents' permission. But what recruiters are doing with this initiative is they're laying the groundwork. They're stimulating interest in the military at a young age so that 4 years, 5 years down the road, when this recruiter is gone, the person who replaces him or her, they will be able to actually have a sign-up from the student that's first introduced. So that's one thing the Air Force is doing.
I think Arlington students are not subjected to recruitment, certainly at that young an age. And likely, however, students in Roxbury, students in urban Worcester, maybe are. Can you tease that out a little bit for us, and why Arlington students might be getting a very different perspective of the military than students in different areas?
Go to Fitchburg. Well, Fitchburg High School happens to be the high school, according to the data I've got through the Freedom of Information Act, the most saturated high school for Army recruiting in the state. 120 visits in a single school year. So that's almost every day.
So certainly the connection is between socioeconomics, and I mean that's the point at which we see very different exposures to military recruiters, I gather.
Yeah, and it was a counter-recruiter, someone who's interested in this issue in the 1970s, who coined the term poverty draft. This is the idea that, okay, we don't have conscription anymore, that's gone, right. But people who are strapped for cash, they want to go to college, don't have the resources, they don't have opportunities in the area in which they grow up, they are essentially being pushed, channeled into military service. So you backed up in the data that we've been getting through the Freedom of Information Act.
We're going to take a quick break, gentlemen, and ask that viewers join us on the other side of this public service announcement.
When you come here, you don't really have to feel like you don't know anybody. You know all of them because they're like your family and they treat you like family. And you're supposed to treat them like family because the children is a place to love and hope.
Hi, it's Susan Karp, the Executive Director of the Arlington Council on Aging and host of Living Out Loud. Today I'd like to mention the idea of the food pantry. Did you know that 50% of the participants in the food pantry are seniors in Arlington? So if your shelves are looking a little bare, if we can help with some of your expenses, give our office a call. We can give you more information on the Arlington Food Pantry, 781-316-3400.
Welcome back to Wide Angle. I am Peter Bermudez, speaking today with Ray Ajemian and Seth Kershner about military recruitment in our schools. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So at the top of our second half, let me just tell both of you, actually, as well as our viewers, the responses that I've gotten from people in Arlington Public Schools relative to the question, what's going on with recruitment, conceivably through football or other means. Again, the football coach was very kind in responding, suggested that he had consulted the athletic director in Arlington, but had not, and I gather didn't need to, speak to the building principal, which would be the high school principal, or the superintendent. and that all players and parents had been informed beforehand about the visit by the recruiters. The guidance department at the high school, as I've said already, suggested that there's one visit in the fall that colleges and military recruiters make. There's a college fair in the spring, to which certainly college recruiters and military recruiters are invited. The dean at the high school, one of the deans, suggested that any visits that are made by military are overseen by administrators, at least one administrator nearby, that there is no junior ROTC at the high school. To her knowledge, there exists no policy in Arlington regarding how the military can interface with Arlington Public School children. She did, however, say that there is an opt-out form given to all junior and senior students at the beginning of the year for parents to sign and thereby not have information shared with the military. You know, just on the off chance that there's something going on at our middle school, I called the head of guidance at the Ottoson Middle School here in Arlington, and he said that there are no programs with any type of military involvement or influence at all. And lastly, I spoke with the military, one of the military recruiters who went to the high school practice, and he said that he does attend the college fair at the high school in the spring. That the Marine Corps, and he was a Marine, also offers band talks, letting students know that Marines provide opportunities for musicians, and therefore it would not be atypical that a Marine recruiter might connect with a band director or music teachers to talk with students about band opportunities in the Marine Corps. And he lastly said that he does not visit the Ottoson, but if somebody from the Ottoson reached out to him, as the high school football coach reached out to him about practice, he would certainly go and talk to them about what it is that the military does and what opportunities might be afforded children at the middle school. So, with all of that background as to what's going on in Arlington, Seth, I read one of your pieces about a mother, I believe in Santa Barbara, California. As I recall the story, her 9th grade son came home one day and informed her that they had had a guest lecturer that day, and it turned out that it was somebody from the military, talking about the military. Can you sort of pick that up there and sort of tell us what happened from there?
After she learned about this Marine recruiter presentation in her son's class, at the time her son was only in 9th grade, after she learned about that, she kind of did what you did, Peter, and she contacted school officials to find out more. She explained that she, was quite alarmed at this level of contact. Her child was still very young, and she was committed enough. She built a small coalition. She worked with her local chapter of Ray's organization, Veterans for Peace, some people in the Quaker community, and in a years-long effort, which was punctuated by a community meeting in, I think in 2014, where they had people give information on this issue to the community. At the end of it all, by the fall of 2014, they'd succeeded in getting the school board to firm up those recruiting policies, so that now Santa Barbara School District, 14,000 students, this is a pretty sizable school district. Now there are policies in place that limit the number of times military recruiters can visit a particular school. Now it's twice a year from each branch of the military. Before it was a free-for-all, and Marines were there every month. That's one piece, so limit on the number of visits. The other piece is it prohibits recruiters while they're in school. It prohibits them from actively soliciting student information. So recruiters, if they're following the rules, they're just required to sort of sit back, and if students are interested, students will approach and voluntarily give their information. Your recruiters cannot actively solicit that information.
Ray, maybe you can then speak to this a little bit. Certainly Counter-Recruitment's brought up there by Seth. not only do you believe it's not appropriate for the military to recruit school children, you've actually taken part in counter-recruitment efforts in your hometown, as well as more recently in Chelsea. Can you give viewers who aren't familiar with it a sense of what it is that counter-recruitment is, and what responses you've gotten?
You mentioned Chelsea. I've not done counter-recruiting there. Chelsea was done with the opt-out form, where the Chelsea for Peace group have for years been going in. They have a good relationship with the administration. They've been going in September because the opt-out form has to be sent in by a certain date, I think early October. They've been going into the cafeteria to solicit students to sign the opt-out form. The administration is very supportive. They do nothing to stop them from doing it. And I think that's an important point. I think this whole discussion sort of is based on the fact that administrators in schools around this country simply regard the military as being something that it would do no wrong, and why should we change the policy? Counter-recruiting, all I'm saying is simply giving the other point of view. When I approached it in my own town, the principal of the high school was supportive, but once the approval went up to the superintendent's office, it was rejected, and the school committee also rejected. Now, they were very polite with us that were proposing the changes, but they had no intention of changing the policy. And my point is simply that I think that administrators take it for granted that the military can do no wrong, or that the way it's been done in the past is the way to continue doing in the future. And what we've been talking about here is, my point is that, again, that military recruiters are salesmen, and that if you want your children to be influenced by a salesperson that may not be giving the correct point of view, then you should allow other people to come in.
So I guess then certainly as the circumstance stands in Arlington, what we have maybe is an issue of a little bit of wiggle room, right? That the tradition seems to be there are 2 visits that for military recruiters on an annual basis, but it could be also the football team getting a visit from a recruiter to run a training session. It could be somebody from the USMC band talking to students in a music class about options in band. It could be maybe in a science class, having a recruiter come in and talk about STEM vocations in the military. Yeah, and so the question would be, I think, Seth, for you, if Arlingtonian parents were interested in conceivably having policy made, simply so that there was an understanding and there was a reference point to which we could say this is what the rule is. What would you suggest in terms of policy? What policies might be something that would benefit our children in a town like Arlington?
As you mentioned, there is some wiggle room. There's a tradition in place in Arlington, but it needs to be firmed up, and getting a policy in place would be good. My colleague Scott Harding and I, last year in Education Week, had an op-ed where we laid out a list of must-have elements in any school recruiting policy, and I'll just mention a couple. I mean, there should be a cap on the number of limits that recruiters say can visit twice a year, and that's it. That's not enough, though, because activists on the West Coast have told us that indeed the military and schools, they have a different understanding of what a recruiting visit is. And many times, if it's something like working with the football team, that is not considered a recruiting visit. That's off the books. Doesn't count towards their twice-a-year allotment. And so I think that another thing an Arlington policy ought to have, and any school district policy ought to make clear, is that visits by military recruiters should be defined to include any activity where military personnel come to the campus and interact with students, whether it be a band talk or guest teaching in the gym class or working with the football team. All of those activities should count towards recruiting visits.
It sounds like Arlington is fairly good in terms of the way it deals with the military because of simply the way it's been done in the past. But ideally, it seems to me that they should have a policy, and in doing the policy, they should let other people come in and give an opinion, have parents involved and so forth, and then write it down and then enforce it.
Gentlemen, let's actually sort of close the conversation here. And I guess it's my typical question. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you feel would be important for people in Arlington to know about this issue, and whether they may choose to take some action or not around limiting or specifically writing down what the interaction will be with military recruiters with their children while in school?
I would just urge anyone watching the program who is at all interested in this issue to, if they want to find out more, they can visit the very good website. They can just Google National Network Opposing the Militarization of Youth. It's nmomy.org. It's a clearinghouse for information about this issue, and it's a way for people to get hooked up with others who are concerned about it. That's one thing. And also just to find out about some of the policies, ways of approaching school districts to get more information, and ways of taking action to ensure that these regulations get firmed up a bit. And I think just in the Boston area, Veterans for Peace is doing great work. You should check out their website. And I think I would just want to remind people watching that this may sound like an issue that is just about the military or war and peace, but it's actually, as I think we've hinted at, it goes way beyond that. It's about social justice, well, broadly speaking, because it's a social justice issue when you have students who are in certain schools that are in less socioeconomically privileged areas, getting much more exposure to the military. And I like to put it this way: you have black and brown students who are seeing way more camouflage than college brochures, and that's not right. That's not the kind of system that I think we want here in the U.S.
Exactly, Seth. I think this last point is a major point. I mean, we're talking about Arlington, but the issue is more prevalent in the lower income areas of the state than in Arlington and Lexington and so forth.
I thank you both, certainly for your time, and it has been significant given our Skype challenges, as well as your contributions. And I hope and I trust that your input will be illuminating for people in Arlington who watch.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be well. Conversation regarding our military and how it should be employed can easily be derailed by strong personal opinion, and no doubt warrants its own time. We'll likely take that question up in a future episode of Wide Angle. But today we've tried to keep it straightforward. How is it that our children are being actively recruited by the military, often without our knowledge, and do we, as a community, believe that's in their best interest? If the answer is yes, then we need do nothing, as the military is gathering information on our children as a matter of course, and gaining access to them in unexpected ways. If the answer, however, is no, then other communities have already offered potent examples for us to follow. The decision and the children are ours. For Ray Ajemian and Seth Kershner, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.